She slammed a check for $250,000 flat on the desk, looked him dead in the eyes and said, "I need you to be my husband." Adrian Brooks didn't flinch, didn't smile, didn't reach for the money. He just said, "I'm not something you can rent, Miss Sterling," and walked out. But here's the part nobody talks about 12 months later when the contract was supposed to end. She couldn't let him go. Drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're new here, hit subscribe. You don't want to miss where this goes. The morning everything changed, Adrian Brooks was on his knees. Not in prayer, not in defeat. He was on the cold marble floor of the Sterling Global lobby at 6:47 in the morning, with his left hand wedged behind a heating vent that had been rattling since Tuesday and a crescent wrench in his right, and he was sweating through his gray work shirt because the building's HVAC system had decided again to act like it had a personal grudge against him. He didn't mind the work. He never minded the work. What he minded was the call coming through his earpiece. Dad. Noah's voice. Small. Tight. The voice a 7-year-old uses when he's trying not to cry. "Dad, I can't find my blue folder. Mrs. Patterson says if I forget my homework one more time, she's gonna call you and—" "Noah." Adrian kept his voice level, calm. The wrench turned slowly. "Breathe." "I am breathing." "You're not. You're speed talking. That means you're panicking. Stop. Take one breath." A pause. A small exhale on the other end. "Good," Adrian said. "Now go look in your backpack, the front pocket, not the main one, the little one on the side." Silence. Rustling. Then, "Oh. Found it." "Yeah." Adrian finally got the vent panel loose. The rattling stopped. The lobby went quiet. "What did I tell you about the night before, bud? We check everything the night before, not the morning of." "I know, Dad, I know. Just making sure it sank in." He sat back on his heels, wiped his forehead with the back of his wrist. "You eat breakfast." "The toast got cold." "That's still breakfast. Eat it anyway. Mrs. Henderson gonna walk you to the bus." "Yes." "Okay, have a good day. Be good." "I'm always good." "You're usually good. There's a difference." Noah laughed short, surprised, a little reluctant, and hung up. Adrian let himself have exactly 3 seconds of stillness. 3 seconds where he just sat there on the marble floor with the wrench in his hand and let the quiet settle around him. Then he stood up, grabbed his tools, moved on to the next job. That was Adrian Brooks at 35 years old. That was his entire life compressed into a single morning. The rattling things he fixed. The panicking people he steadied. The cold toast he made sure got eaten anyway. He had not taken a vacation in 4 years. He had not been on a date in 3. He had not slept more than 6 hours in a single night since the week before his wife Diane passed away, which was 2 years, 4 months and 11 days ago. Not that he counted. He counted. People who saw him in the hallways of Sterling Global saw a maintenance technician. A quiet man in a gray shirt. Reliable. Invisible. The kind of person you noticed only when something needed fixing and forgot the moment it was fixed. They did not see the man who packed a Spider-Man lunchbox every morning at 5:15 because Noah refused to eat the school's chicken nuggets. They did not see the man who read Charlotte's Web out loud 4 nights in a row because Noah cried the first time and wanted to understand why. They did not see the man who worked a second job on weekends, small appliance repairs, mostly out of a beat-up van because his base salary covered the rent only if nothing unexpected happened, and something unexpected always happened. Last month, it was Noah's ear infection. The month before that, a busted radiator. Life had a way of finding Adrian's margins and pushing them. He pushed back. Every single time. Quietly, without applause, without complaint. That was who he was. That was who Victoria Sterling was about to underestimate. Victoria Sterling arrived at Sterling Global at 7:15 sharp, the same time every morning, in the same black car with the same driver. Marcus, who had worked for her for 9 years and knew better than to make conversation before she'd finished her first coffee. She walked through the lobby without looking at it. She never looked at the lobby. Her eyes were already on her phone, already processing the overnight reports from the Singapore office, already 3 decisions ahead of whoever she'd be meeting with first. She was 41 years old. She had built Sterling Global from a 12-person startup into a company worth $4 billion. She had been on the cover of Forbes twice and Time magazine once. She had also been engaged and unengaged and very publicly humiliated, and she did not think about that ever, and certainly not at 7:15 on a Tuesday morning. She made it to the elevator before she noticed the silence. The lobby had been rattling for a week. Some HVAC issue the facilities team kept promising to address. Every morning she'd walked through a low, persistent vibration that set her teeth on edge. This morning, nothing. She stepped into the elevator, pressed 42. Then she paused, looked back. A maintenance worker was packing up his tools near the vent panel on the far side of the lobby. Gray shirt, broad shoulders, moving with the quiet efficiency of someone who didn't need an audience. She watched him for exactly 2 seconds. Then the elevator doors closed. She forgot about him immediately. Or she thought she did. It was 3 weeks later when she actually spoke to him. Not because she sought him out. Victoria Sterling did not seek out maintenance workers. It happened because of a child. She was coming back from lunch, a working lunch 45 minutes back-to-back with a call she'd had to take in the car, and she was walking fast through the lobby, already mentally halfway up to the 42nd floor, when she heard it. Crying. Not loud crying. The particular hiccuping, trying to stop kind of crying. A little boy, maybe 7 or 8, sitting on the bench near the security desk. His backpack was on the floor. His knee was bleeding, just scraped, not serious, and he was staring at it like it had personally betrayed him. He'd tripped on the steps outside, she heard later. His mother was stuck in traffic. Security had sat him down and called her, and were now carefully avoiding making sustained eye contact with a crying child, the way adults in professional environments often did. Victoria had stopped walking. She didn't know why. She was looking at the child, and then she heard boots on marble, and someone crouched down next to the boy. Not the security guard, not anyone from the front desk, the maintenance worker. The one from 3 weeks ago. He came down to the boy's level, without hesitation. No ceremony. Just dropped down like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Hey," he said. "That looks like it hurts." The boy looked at him with the suspicious mistrust of a child evaluating a stranger. "It does hurt. I believe you. How'd it happen?" "I fell on the steps." "The steps got you, huh?" The man nodded seriously, like this was important information. "Those steps are sneaky. I've been meaning to file a complaint against them." The boy blinked. "You can't file a complaint against steps." "Says who?" A pause. Then reluctantly, the beginning of a smile. "Steps can't read. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe they've never been told the rules." He reached into his work bag and pulled out a small first aid kit. Beat up, well-used, the kind you bought at a dollar store and kept because you needed it regularly. "Can I take a look?" The boy considered this, then nodded. Victoria did not move. She stood 12 feet away and watched this man clean a scraped knee with the practiced patience of someone who had done this 100 times. He talked while he worked, easy. Unhurried, the kind of talk that wasn't really about anything except making sure the boy forgot to be scared. He asked the boy's name. He asked if he had a favorite superhero. He asked whether, scientifically speaking, a Band-Aid with Spider-Man on it worked better than a plain one, and he said he personally believed the answer was yes. The boy said his name was Marcus. The man said, "Good name, strong name." By the time the Band-Aid was on, Marcus was no longer crying. He was explaining with considerable authority why Iron Man would beat Spider-Man in a fight, and the maintenance worker was listening with the expression of a man who took this debate seriously. Victoria looked down at her phone. She had 6 unread messages and a call scheduled to start in 4 minutes. She walked to the elevator. She pressed 42, and for the second time, she thought she forgot about him. She didn't. She had her assistant pull his file that afternoon. She told herself it was routine. She periodically reviewed facilities staff. It was nothing specific. Adrian Marcus Brooks. Age 35. Hired 18 months ago. Maintenance technician level 2. Performance reviews consistently excellent. No disciplinary incidents. One commendation from the building manager for, she almost smiled, resolving a recurring HVAC issue in the main lobby. Emergency contact Noah Brooks' son, age 7. She stared at that line for longer than she meant to. She closed the file. She did not think about it again. Until her lawyer called. Victoria. David Park had been her corporate attorney for 11 years. He was precise, unflappable, and allergic to small talk, which was why she trusted him. We have a situation with the Hargrove deal. She leaned back in her chair. The city spread out below her 42 floors down. Tell me, Edmund Hargrove's people have been asking questions. About you specifically. About your personal situation. He paused. Edmund is 73 years old, and the last time I checked, deeply traditional. His team's been running background on you. Let them run background. Victoria. His primary concern, based on what my source is telling me, is stability. He's about to commit $300 million to a joint venture. He doesn't want a partner whose personal life is, his words not mine, volatile. She said nothing. The engagement that ended 3 years ago is still a story people tell, David said carefully. Richard's narrative got out there first. The Ice Queen who couldn't love anyone. That's still attached to your name in certain circles. Edmund's circles. So what are you telling me? I'm telling you that if you want this deal, you need to change the narrative. Not permanently, not forever, just long enough to close. He paused again. You need to present a different picture of who you are. Victoria stood up, walked to the window, looked at the city. How long, she said. The Hargrove negotiations will take approximately 10 to 12 months. If you could demonstrate, even suggest a stable personal life during that window. You want me to manufacture a relationship. I want you to consider your options. She stared at the glass, at her own reflection staring back. Give me a few days, she said. She thought about it for 48 hours. She turned it over from every angle, the way she turned over every business problem systematically without sentiment, looking for the cleanest solution. And somehow, every time she turned it over, she ended up thinking about a man on his knees on a marble floor, talking a frightened child into laughing. She told herself that was just good judgment. She needed someone credible, someone who couldn't be easily bought or compromised. Someone who would hold up under scrutiny. She told herself it was purely strategic. She was not a woman who lied to herself often, but when she did, she was very convincing. She called him into her office on a Thursday morning. Adrian had been told by her assistant that the CEO wanted to see him about a building maintenance issue. He arrived in his work clothes, gray shirt, steel-toed boots, tool bag over one shoulder, because he'd been in the middle of replacing a filtration unit on the 38th floor and hadn't had time to change. He looked around her office once when he came in. Not with awe, not with envy. Just a quick practical scan. The way a man who fixed things looked at a new room, noting the layout, the windows, the age of the fixtures. Then he looked at her. Miss Sterling, he said. Your assistant mentioned a maintenance issue. Victoria was behind her desk. She had prepared for this conversation the way she prepared for board presentations. She had the contract already drafted. She had the number selected. She had the argument structured. She said, "Sit down, Mr. Brooks." He sat. She placed the folder on the desk, but did not open it yet. "I'm going to say something to you," she said, "and I need you to hear all of it before you respond. Can you do that?" He looked at her steadily. "I can. I'm in the middle of a negotiation that is worth to my company somewhere between $200 and $300 million. The success of that negotiation depends partially, not entirely, but partially, on the personal image I present over the next 12 months. She paused. "I need someone to stand beside me, publicly, as my partner." Adrian didn't move. His expression didn't change. He was just listening the way he'd said he would. "I'm not talking about a personal relationship," she continued. "I'm talking about an arrangement, a professional one with a defined timeline and clear terms." She slid the folder toward him. 12 months. You would live in my home. There is a separate wing. Your privacy is protected and appear beside me at relevant public events. You would bring your son. The presence of a child actually strengthens the image we're trying to project. She met his eyes. In exchange, I will pay you $250,000 deposited in installments. At the end of 12 months, the arrangement concludes. No further obligations on either side. She stopped talking. Adrian looked at the folder. He didn't open it. He sat there for a moment that stretched, and Victoria, who was not accustomed to uncertainty, found herself watching his face for something she could read. Then he looked up. "Miss Sterling," he said, and his voice was very quiet and very even. "I appreciate that you came to me directly and that you were honest about what this is." He stood up. "But I'm not something you can rent." He picked up his tool bag. "I'll put in a request for someone else to handle your maintenance needs going forward. Have a good morning." He walked out. Victoria did not move for a full 30 seconds. In 11 years of running Sterling Global, she had been told no exactly 4 times. She remembered each one. This was the 5th. It was also the first one that left her staring at an empty chair, wondering what she'd done wrong. She found out about the rent notice by accident. She hadn't been looking into his personal finances, she told herself that clearly firmly. Even as her assistant quietly confirmed that Adrian Brooks was 2 months behind on his apartment, and that a repair job he'd been counting on had fallen through when the client canceled without payment. She wasn't surveilling him. She was being thorough. She called him again 4 days later. Different approach this time. "I owe you an apology," she said when he appeared in her office doorway. "The way I framed the offer was wrong. I treated you like a variable in an equation instead of a person. I'm sorry for that." He looked at her. She pressed on. "I also want to be honest with you, because I think you're someone who respects honesty more than polish. My situation is real. The business stakes are real. And I'm asking you, not hiring you, asking you to consider whether this is something you'd be willing to discuss further." Adrian stepped inside. Didn't sit. Just stood there, arms crossed, watching her. "Why me?" he said. "Because you told me no." He was quiet. "Everyone in this building," she said, "wants something from me. They are careful around me, or they are afraid of me, or they are managing me. You walked out." She held his gaze. "I need someone beside me who isn't performing. Someone who won't be bought or impressed or intimidated. Someone—" She stopped. Reset. "I watched you with that boy in the lobby, Marcus, 3 weeks ago." Something shifted slightly in his face. "You didn't stop because someone was watching," she said. "You stopped because a child was hurt. That's—" She paused, choosing the word carefully. "Rare." Adrian unfolded his arms, looked at the window, back at her. "I have a son," he said. "I know. He comes with me. Non-negotiable. If this is a living arrangement, he is part of it. He has his own schedule, his own routines. I'm not disrupting that. Of course, I won't lie to Noah about what this is. He's 7. I'll keep it simple, but I won't tell him things that aren't true." Agreed. "And I won't—" He stopped, started again. "I won't be your prop, Miss Sterling. I'll stand beside you in public. I'll be respectful and appropriate, and I'll do what the arrangement requires. But in private, I'm his father first. That doesn't go away." "I understand." He was quiet for another moment. "The money," he said finally. "I need—" He stopped again. There was something in his face that looked like it cost him something to say the next part. "I need it to be real. I'm not in a position where I can afford this to fall through." "It won't fall through. I need that in writing." "It will be in writing." He looked at the folder still sitting on her desk. Then he walked over, sat down, opened it. He read every page. She waited. He asked 3 questions about liability, about the termination clause, about the confidentiality terms, covering Noah specifically. She answered each one. He picked up the pen, and then he put it back down. "One more thing," he said. She waited. "My son has been through a lot," Adrian said. "He lost his mother. He's finally in a place where he feels safe. Whatever this is, when it ends clean. no confusion, no loose ends that he has to carry. His voice didn't waver, but his jaw was tight. I need your word on that. Victoria looked at him. She thought about saying something polished, something corporate and legal and carefully worded. Instead, she said, "You have my word." He picked up the pen. He signed, and Victoria Sterling sat across from Adrian Brooks and told herself she had just made a very smart business decision. She ignored the feeling in her chest that said it was something else entirely. They moved in on a Saturday. Noah brought his backpack, his Spider-Man pillow, a shoebox full of Legos that spilled twice on the moving van, and the framed photo of his mother that lived on his nightstand and had lived there since the week after the funeral. He walked into Victoria's mansion, the way 7-year-olds walk into places they've never been, looking up at everything, touching nothing, yet storing it all. "It's really big," he told his father. "It is," Adrian agreed. "Are there ghosts?" "No." "How do you know?" "Because ghosts aren't real. That's what people say right before the ghost shows up." Adrian looked down at his son. "Go pick your room. The blue hallway, your wing. Don't touch anything in the main house without asking." Noah looked up at him with the expression of a child who was already planning which rules were guidelines. "Noah, I heard you." He disappeared down the hallway with his Spider-Man pillow tucked under his arm. Victoria was standing near the entrance. She had been watching. She realized a moment too late that she was almost smiling. She stopped. "The house rules are in the folder I had sent to your phone," she said. "The kitchen staff starts at 6. Dinner is at 7. If your son has allergies." "He's allergic to tree nuts," Adrian said. "I sent a list to your assistant." "Good. Yes, she mentioned it." Victoria paused. "My schedule for next week includes 2 events. I'll have the details forwarded." "Okay. The arrangement begins formally Monday." "Understood." She started to walk away. "Miss Sterling." She turned. Adrian was looking at her with a directness that was, for reasons she couldn't quite name, a little disarming. "Thank you," he said, "for the room he's getting. It's more than he's used to." Victoria didn't know what to do with that. She nodded, turned, walked away. In her own house in the hallway leading to the east wing, she stopped for a moment. From somewhere down the far corridor, she could hear Noah's voice talking to himself, or maybe to the house, cataloging the things he was discovering. She stood there and listened. It had been a very long time since there had been a child's voice in this house. It had been a very long time since this house had felt like anything other than an address. She told herself that was not relevant. She walked up to her office, opened her laptop, told herself very firmly that she had made a business decision, and tried not to think about the photo of a woman on a little boy's nightstand and the man who had made sure it made the trip. The contract was 37 pages long. It covered everything either of them could think of. It did not cover what was about to happen. The first week was professional, efficient, cold in the way that expensive things sometimes are, all clean lines and correct behavior, and not a single moment where either of them forgot what this was. Adrian showed up at events the way he showed up at work. On time. Prepared. He wore the suits that Victoria's stylist selected without complaint, though he quietly asked that they not be too fitted because he needed to be able to move in them, and the stylist had looked at him like he'd said something in a foreign language. He stood beside Victoria at a technology investment dinner on Wednesday night and shook hands and answered questions, and did not once reach for her hand or lean in too close or perform the kind of easy affection that would have felt false and he suspected would have looked it too. Victoria noticed that. She filed it away without examining it. At the dinner, a man named Gerald Whitmore, silver-haired, third-generation money, the kind of man who thought charm was something you inherited, leaned across the table and said to Adrian, "And what is it you do exactly?" Adrian looked at him pleasantly. "Building maintenance. I keep things running." Whitmore smiled the smile of a man who didn't know what to do with that answer. "Ah, and you two?" He glanced between them. "How did you meet?" "At work," Adrian said simply. "He fixed something that wasn't working," Victoria said, and something about the way she said it landed strangely, and she moved on quickly before anyone could examine it too carefully. Later in the car, going home, Adrian sat on his side of the back seat and loosened his tie with the particular relief of a man who had been patient long enough. "You did well tonight," Victoria said, looking at her phone. "I just answered questions." "Most people can't do that. They oversell. They overexplain." She scrolled through something. "You were natural." "I wasn't performing." She looked up from her phone. He was looking out the window. His profile was calm, unreadable. "I know," she said. He didn't say anything else. Neither did she. They rode the rest of the way in silence, and it was not Victoria noticed an uncomfortable silence. That bothered her more than she expected. Back at the house, Noah was asleep. Mrs. Henderson, Adrian's neighbor who had agreed to stay some evenings, reported that he'd eaten a full dinner, done his reading, and negotiated a 10-minute extension on bedtime that she'd granted, because in her words, he made a very reasonable argument. Adrian laughed at that, quietly to himself in the hallway outside Noah's door, checking on his son the way he did every night before he went to sleep himself. Victoria was walking past when she heard it. The laugh, low and private and not meant for anyone. She kept walking. She told herself she hadn't slowed down. The second week was harder. Not because anything went wrong, nothing went wrong. The arrangement was functioning exactly as designed. They appeared together. They were convincing. David Park reported that the preliminary signals from the Hargrove camp were positive. Everything was working. The problem was Noah. Noah Brooks did not understand contracts. He did not understand arrangements. He did not understand that there were rules about emotional attachment and professional distance, and the correct way to conduct a business relationship disguised as a marriage. What Noah understood was that he was living in a house with a lot of rooms and a woman who seemed lonely. He had appointed himself without asking anyone's permission to do something about that. It started small. The second Tuesday of their arrangement, Victoria came down to the kitchen at 6:45 to find Noah already at the breakfast table, eating cereal, doing something on the tablet his father allowed him in the mornings. He looked up when she walked in. "Good morning," he said. Victoria stopped. The kitchen staff was not in yet. She had expected the room to be empty. "Good morning," she said carefully. "Dad already left. He had an early thing." Noah returned to his tablet, then looked back up. "Do you want some cereal? We have the good kind. Dad bought it when he went to the store. The one with the stars." Victoria looked at the cereal box on the counter. It had a cartoon on the front. She was not a cereal person. She had a personal chef who prepared her breakfast at 7:15. She had never once eaten cereal from a box with a cartoon on it. "I have my own," she started. "It's really good," Noah said. "I'm just saying." There was a pause. Victoria opened the cabinet, found a bowl, poured cereal. She sat across from Noah at the kitchen island and ate cereal at 6:45 in the morning and tried to remember the last time she'd sat in her own kitchen without a purpose. Noah didn't try to make conversation. He was focused on whatever he was watching. Every so often he laughed at something short, uncomplicated, the laugh of a child who found something genuinely funny and didn't think about whether it was appropriate to laugh. Victoria ate her cereal and listened to him laugh and did not examine what she was feeling. When Adrian came in 20 minutes later, he stopped in the kitchen doorway. He looked at his son. He looked at Victoria. He looked at the cereal bowl in front of her. He said nothing. But something moved through his expression, quick, controlled, gone before she could name it. "Noah," he said. "You almost ready?" "Almost." Noah slid off the stool, carried his bowl to the sink. "Miss Sterling ate the star cereal," he reported, as though this were information his father needed. "I can see that," Adrian said. Victoria stood, straightened her jacket. "I'll be out of your way." "You're not in our way," Adrian said. She looked at him. He was looking at her with that same directness that had been disarming her since the first day in her office, and she had not yet figured out how to account for it in her calculations. "I have calls starting at 7, she said, and left. She was halfway up the stairs before she realized she'd taken the cereal bowl with her. She stood on the landing holding the bowl and was briefly furious at herself for reasons she couldn't articulate. Then she went and made her 7 o'clock call. The third week, something shifted. It wasn't a single moment. It was more like a series of small moments that accumulated faster than Victoria could manage them. There was the night Adrian found her in the kitchen at 11:30, sitting at the island with her laptop and 3 folders spread out, and the kind of expression on her face that came from too many hours of high-stakes thinking. He didn't ask what was wrong. He went to the refrigerator. He made 2 cups of tea. She heard the kettle, the clink of mugs, and he put one beside her laptop without saying anything, and sat down at the other end of the island with the other cup and a paperback he'd apparently been carrying in his work bag. She looked at the tea. She looked at him. He was reading. She said, "You don't have to stay." "I know," he said, turning a page. She turned back to her laptop. They sat in the kitchen for an hour, working in separate silences that somehow inexplicably added up to something that felt like company. She didn't say thank you when she went to bed. He didn't expect her to. There was the afternoon a week later when the Hargrove meeting went sideways, not catastrophically, but badly enough that Victoria spent the drive home in a particular kind of rigid quiet that her driver Marcus recognized and treated carefully. She walked in, went straight upstairs, closed her office door. An hour later there was a knock. She expected her assistant, or a staff member. It was Adrian. I was still in his jacket from the event. He hadn't changed yet. He was holding the folder David Park had messengered over the revised terms, the ones that needed review before tomorrow. "David called the house line," Adrian said. "He thought you'd want this tonight." She took the folder. "Thank you." He didn't leave. "The Hargrove people pushed back," he said. She looked at him. "How do you know about that? I was standing next to you for 4 hours today. I can read a room." He leaned against the doorframe. "What did they push back on?" "It doesn't concern you." "Probably not," he agreed. "But you've been in there an hour, and I'd guess you've been going over the same 3 pages 20 times without seeing them, so." He shrugged slightly. "Talk me through it. Sometimes it helps to say it out loud to someone who isn't going to panic about it or try to fix it before they understand it." Victoria looked at him for a long moment. Then she stepped back from the door. He came in, sat in the chair across from her desk, not behind it, not at the side table. The chair where people sat when she was questioning them. He sat in it like it was just a chair. She talked him through the Hargrove issue. She did it quickly, clinically, the way she'd brief a board member. No editorial, no emotional loading. Just the facts. He listened. He didn't interrupt. He asked one question at the end. Hargrove himself, not his team. Does he actually have concerns, or is this his people running procedure? She stopped. "Because there's a difference," Adrian said. "If it's procedure, you wait it out. If it's actually him." He paused. What's his objection at the core? Strip out everything his lawyers said. What does he actually want to know? Victoria leaned back in her chair. Thought. "I wants to know if I'm going to be here in 5 years," she said slowly. "Not the company. Me. He's seen too many founder-led companies where the founder burns out or exits and the whole thing changes. He wants to know if I'm in it." Adrian nodded. "So tell him that. It's not that simple. It might be that simple." He stood. "People who've been around a long time built things themselves. They don't always want data. Sometimes they just want to look at you and decide if they believe you." He moved toward the door. "Request a one-on-one. No lawyers. Somewhere informal. Let him ask what he actually wants to ask." He left. Victoria sat with that for a while. 2 days later, she requested a one-on-one lunch with Edmund Hargrove. No lawyers. A restaurant he'd chosen casual for his standards. She let him ask whatever he wanted. He asked her one question that wasn't on any legal document. "Why do you care about this company? Not the money. Why does it matter to you?" She told him the truth. A version of it she hadn't said out loud to anyone in a long time. About building something from nothing. About the people who worked for her. About what she'd been trying to prove for 11 years, and what she'd figured out along the way about what actually mattered. He listened. He shook her hand at the end of lunch. His team called David Park the next morning. The deal moved forward. Victoria told Adrian that evening. Just told him they were in the kitchen. Noah was doing homework at the table. It was ordinary in the way that evenings had started becoming ordinary, and she said, "The Hargrove meeting worked. Your instinct was right." Adrian looked up from the faucet he'd been tightening because he'd noticed it dripping and couldn't help himself. "Good," he said. "Thank you," she said, "for the advice." He looked at her for a moment. A small recognition, nothing more. "You're welcome," he said, and went back to the faucet. Noah, without looking up from his math worksheet, said, "What's Hargrove? Business," Adrian said. "Is it boring business or interesting business? What's the difference?" "Boring business is numbers. Interesting business is when people do things." Adrian looked at Victoria. Victoria looked at Noah. "People did things," she said. Noah nodded approvingly. "Cool." He went back to his worksheet. Something in Victoria's chest did something that she decided not to investigate right now. It was at the fourth week, the first Friday, when Richard Hale reappeared. Not in person. Not yet. First he reappeared as a name mentioned by one of Victoria's board members, casually in a way that was not casual at all. "I ran into Richard Hale at a function last week," said Lawrence Cho, who was 62 and cautious and had been on her board since year 3. "He said some interesting things." Victoria was on a call. She kept her voice even. "Richard Hale has been saying interesting things since before I met him. It hasn't gotten him very far. He mentioned your new situation." A deliberate pause. "He seemed to suggest it was arranged." "People suggest things all the time." "Victoria." Lawrence's voice dropped slightly. "If there's anything that could be used to create doubt—" "There is nothing," she said. "Are we still on for Tuesday?" "Yes, of course." "Good." She ended the call. She sat at her desk for 4 minutes without moving. Then she called David Park. "Richard's talking," she said. "I know," David said. "I heard from 2 people in the last 24 hours. "What is he saying specifically?" "That the relationship is performative. That you're presenting a false image to close the Hargrove deal. He doesn't have proof. He's implying. Creating doubt is easier than proving anything." "Where is he getting his information?" "I don't know yet, but Victoria—" David paused. "He's going to escalate. This is what he does. He starts with implication, and he works toward damage." She knew that. She'd watched him do it once before, to her specifically 3 years ago. She knew exactly how he built a story. She knew exactly how he made people doubt. "Fine," she said. "What do you want to do?" "I want you to find out everything he's done in the last 6 months, and I want it on my desk by Monday." She hung up. She sat there in the quiet of her office and let herself feel for exactly 1 minute the old, specific, cold anger that came with Richard's name. The kind of anger that was mostly about the fact that she'd been naive enough to trust him, and she hated being naive more than almost anything. Then she closed it down. She had work to do. She told Adrian that evening after Noah was in bed. Not because she was required to, because she'd decided without quite deciding, which was itself unusual, that he should know. "Richard Hale is running a campaign," she said. She'd found Adrian in the back hallway tightening something on a door hinge. He really could not leave broken things alone. "He's suggesting to people that our arrangement is manufactured." Adrian set down the screwdriver, turned to face her. "Is he? He doesn't have proof, but he doesn't need proof. He needs doubt." "Who is he?" She had assumed he already knew. Then she remembered Adrian didn't follow her world. He didn't read the social pages. He didn't know the background. She told him, clinically, ex-fiancé, 3 years ago, the weeks before the wedding, the discovery. Adrian listened without reaction. When she finished, he said, "What did he actually want at the time? What was his play?" "My company, my connections. There were investment deals he needed my name attached to." "And when you ended it, did those deals fall through?" "Yes." "So this is old score settling?" "Partially." She crossed her arms. "And partially he's opportunistic. He smells a vulnerability, and he uses it." Adrian was quiet for a moment. Then, "What does he know about the arrangement specifically?" "I don't know yet. David is looking into it. Because if he knows the terms, the contract, the financial arrangement, he got that from somewhere close. Someone who had access. Victoria looked at him. You think someone in my organization? I think information doesn't travel from nothing, Adrian said simply. He knows something specific or he's guessing. If he's guessing, let him guess. If he knows something specific, that's a different problem. She stared at him. You think like this naturally? He looked slightly puzzled by the question. You mean practically? I mean strategically. When Noah was sick 2 years ago, Adrian said, we had no insurance that covered the specialist she needed to see. I had to figure out how the system worked, who made decisions, what leverage I had, what the actual rules were versus what people said the rules were. He picked up the screwdriver. You learn to think practically when you don't have other options. Victoria was quiet for a moment. I'll brief you before any public events, she said, so you know what's coming. Okay. If he approaches you directly, he won't rattle me, Adrian said. I've had harder conversations than Richard Hale. She believed him. She went back inside, stood in her hallway, thought about a man navigating a medical system with no resources and a sick child, and the kind of systematic patient problem-solving that took and felt something that was complicated and that she set aside for later. Later kept piling up. The first month ended, and then the second began, and somewhere in the accumulation of mornings and evenings and events, and late nights, and kitchen conversations, and Noah's unrelenting, cheerful campaign to make Victoria Sterling feel like a person who lived in her own house, something started to change. It wasn't dramatic. Victoria had expected in her darker moments that she might find the arrangement difficult, that having strangers in her space would feel like an intrusion, that the performance of domesticity would wear on her. She'd braced for that. What she had not braced for was comfort. She had not braced for the way Adrian rebuilt a stuck drawer in her study. Without mentioning it, she just opened it one day, and it worked, and she knew exactly who'd done it, and he never said a word. She had not braced for the way Noah left notes on the refrigerator, not for anyone specifically just there. Small drawings of things he'd seen that day. A dog outside the school gates, a cloud that looked like a dinosaur. She had not braced for the sound of someone else moving through the house at night. The quiet domestic sounds of another life existing alongside hers, and the way those sounds made the house feel inhabited rather than just occupied. She had not braced for any of it. She'd designed an arrangement. She'd built a structure, and the structure was holding. The problem was what was growing inside it. Richard made his first direct move in the 6th week. He called her office. Victoria had her assistant take a message. She did not take calls from Richard Hale, directly had not for 3 years, but the message itself was careful, precise, the way Richard always was. Not a threat. Never overtly a threat. Just a note that he'd love to catch up, that he'd heard she was doing well, that he had information she might find useful. Victoria read the message once and deleted it. Then she called Adrian. He picked up on the second ring. Yeah, he called the office, she said. It's starting. A brief pause. Okay, Adrian said. What do you need? The question was simple, practical. What do you need? Not what does the contract require. Not what is the procedure. Not what would be optimal. What do you need? She opened her mouth to give him a business answer, a tactical answer. I don't know yet, she said instead. Another pause, shorter. Then I'll be there when you figure it out, he said. She stood at her office window for a long moment after he hung up. Then she started making calls. David confirmed by end of week that Richard had been in contact with 2 of Victoria's mid-level executives. Both had declined to engage. But Richard was patient. He'd always been patient. He knew how to find the person in any organization who had the smallest grievance and the loosest loyalty, and he knew how to make them feel like talking to him was the smart move. The evening that David gave her his full report, Victoria came home to find Noah attempting to teach her how to play a card game called Crazy Eights at the kitchen table. He had apparently decided this was an important life skill she was missing. You have to put down a card that matches the suit or the number, he explained with the authority of a 7-year-old who had mastered something. Or an 8. 8s are wild. Do you know what wild means? I know what wild means, Noah. Some grown-ups don't know card games, he said non-judgmentally. I know card games. Name one. She paused. Bridge. He considered this. Is that a real one? Yes. Can we play it? It requires 4 people and a significant amount of patience. Dad has patience. He's really patient. Noah looked at her cards. You're holding them wrong, like this. He demonstrated. She adjusted. Better. He played a 7 of clubs with satisfaction. Your turn. Victoria looked at her hand. Played a 7 of diamonds. Noah looked at it. Good, he said, as though she'd done something praiseworthy. Adrian came in from the study, where he'd been on a call with his weekend repair client, and stopped when he saw them. Is she winning? He asked Noah. Not yet, Noah said. But she's getting it. Adrian pulled out the stool at the end of the island and sat down and watched them play, and he had a look on his face that Victoria couldn't see from where she was sitting, but that was in fact a very private kind of happiness. The kind that comes when the things you care about most are in the same room, and nobody is in danger, and there is nowhere else you need to be. He did not know she couldn't see it. He didn't know she could feel it. Noah won the game, then immediately demanded a rematch. Victoria won the rematch, which she suspected Noah allowed. She did not say so. He was 7, and she was not cruel. They played 3 rounds, and by the 3rd round, it was past Noah's bedtime, and he was listing slightly sideways on his stool, and still insisting he wasn't tired. Bed, Adrian said. One more. Bed. Noah looked at Victoria with the expression of someone appealing a verdict. Miss Sterling, could we— Your father said bed, Victoria said. Noah studied her with new assessment, then looked at his father. You trained her. Go, Adrian said. Noah gathered his cards with dignity and took himself to bed, bidding them both good night with the solemnity of a man who had lost a battle, but not a war. Adrian started clearing the table. Victoria helped, which she did without thinking, which she noticed only after she'd already picked up the cards. He likes you, Adrian said. He wasn't looking at her. He was stacking cards. He likes everyone. He doesn't like everyone. He set the cards down. He's selective. He's a kid who had a lot of his world change very fast, and he doesn't extend trust easily. He decides about people quickly, and he doesn't usually revisit it. He picked up Noah's glass, carried it to the sink. He decided about you in the first week, he said. I'm not saying that to— He paused. I'm just saying, it means something, if you want it to. Victoria set the rest of the cards on the counter. She said, I don't know how to be around children. I never— She stopped. I wasn't built for this. Nobody's built for it, Adrian said. You figure it out as you go. That's frightening. Yeah, he said simply. It is. He turned off the kitchen light over the sink, and the room shifted to the softer overhead lamp, and they were standing in her kitchen at 9:30 at night after a card game, and something in the air between them had changed texture without either of them having agreed to change it. Adrian, she said. He waited. I know this isn't— She stopped again. She was not accustomed to not being able to finish sentences. The arrangement. I know what it is. I know what I agreed to and what you agreed to. I know you do, he said. I just want to make sure. She looked at the counter. I don't want anything to become unclear. He was quiet for a moment. Victoria, he said, and it was the first time he'd used her name, her actual name without the title, and it landed differently than she'd expected. She looked at him. Nothing is unclear to me, he said. I know what the contract says. I know what this started as. He held her gaze. I also know that the last 6 weeks have been the most— He stopped, chose carefully. I know what's happening, and I'm not going to pretend it isn't. But I'm also not going to do anything about it unless you decide what you want first. Because you're the one who built the walls, and only you get to decide if they come down. He said it without drama, without demand, just clearly. The way a man says a true thing because it's true. Then he said, Good night, Miss Sterling, and he went down the hall. Victoria stood in her kitchen alone. She pressed both hands flat on the counter. She told herself that she was in control of this, that she understood the variables, that she had designed this situation and she could manage its parameters. She believed herself less than she had 6 weeks ago. From down the hall she heard Adrian stop outside Noah's door. A soft knock, a murmured exchange, a small laugh from Noah half asleep. The low sound of Adrian's voice saying something she couldn't make out. She stood there and listened until it was quiet. Then she went upstairs. She sat at her desk and did not open her laptop. She sat there for a long time with the city spread out below her and the house quiet around her, and tried to remember what it felt like to be certain. She couldn't quite get there. Something had moved. Something that she'd kept in a very specific place for 3 years, walled off and controlled, and exactly where she'd put it after Richard Hale had taken it and used it against her. Something had moved, and she hadn't felt it move, and that was the part that scared her most. Because Victoria Sterling had built her entire life on knowing exactly what was in every room, and somehow without a key, without permission, without even trying. Adrian Brooks had opened a door she'd been sure was locked. She looked at the city, thought about what he'd said. Only you get to decide if they come down. She closed her eyes. She did not sleep well that night. But for the first time in years, the reason had nothing to do with being alone. The morning after she didn't sleep, Victoria made a decision. She decided that what happened in the kitchen was a moment. A lapse in the careful architecture she had built. It happened because she was tired, and because Richard's return had unsettled her, and because Noah's card game had been disarmingly ordinary, and because Adrian Brooks had said a true thing in a quiet voice, and she'd let it land somewhere it shouldn't have. It wouldn't happen again. She was at her desk by 5:30, laptop open, coffee in hand. The familiar armor of work already in place by the time Adrian appeared in the kitchen at 6 with Noah half asleep and draped over his shoulder. Victoria was back to being the person she'd built, certain, controlled, forward-facing. "Morning," Adrian said. "Good morning," she said, not looking up from her screen. He registered the shift. She knew he did because he didn't try to breach it. He put Noah in a chair, started the cereal, moved through the kitchen with the quiet practicality that was just his nature, and didn't ask anything of her. That was the thing about Adrian that she was learning to be wary of. He never pushed. He never crowded. He simply existed in proximity, steady and present and real, and let her decide how close to get. She was discovering a far more dangerous quality than aggression. She left the kitchen at 6:20. She did not take the cereal bowl with her this time. She told herself that was progress. By that afternoon, Richard had moved. David called her at 2. He got to Marcus. Victoria went still. "My Marcus, my driver." Marcus. Not directly. He got to Marcus's brother-in-law, who apparently runs in some of the same financial circles Richard's been cultivating. The brother-in-law mentioned to Marcus innocently. I think the brother-in-law probably didn't even know what he was doing. That Richard was saying publicly that your relationship with Adrian Brooks was a contracted arrangement, that the whole thing was fabricated to secure the Hargrove deal. David paused. Marcus didn't repeat it to anyone. He came to me. Marcus came to you. He wanted me to know. He said, and I'm quoting, "I work for Miss Sterling, not for gossip." Victoria sat with that for a moment. 9 years. Marcus had driven her through 2 company crises, the end of her engagement, 3 international expansions, and more late nights than either of them could count. He'd never said more than he needed to. Apparently, that was loyalty she'd been taking for granted. "Tell Marcus I said thank you," she said. Specifically. "I will. And David, I want a meeting with Richard." Silence on the other end. "Victoria. Not what you're thinking. A meeting. Controlled on my terms in a place I choose. I want to look at him while I tell him to stop. I strongly advise. I'm not asking for advice. I'm asking for the meeting." Another pause. "I'll set it up." She set the phone down. Looked at the city. Thought about Marcus's brother-in-law and how Richard had always known how to move laterally, how he never came at something directly, how he found the soft connections, the side doors. 3 years had not changed his methods. She was thinking through her approach to the meeting when her office door opened without a knock. She turned. It was Lawrence Cho, board member, the one who'd mentioned Richard on the phone 2 weeks ago. He came in and closed the door behind him, and he had the expression of a man carrying something he didn't enjoy carrying. "Lawrence," she said, "you didn't have an appointment." "No," he agreed. He sat down across from her desk. "Victoria, I need to talk to you about something directly, and I need you to hear it the same way." She waited. "The board is getting noise about the Brooks situation." He folded his hands on his knee. "Nothing formal, nothing on the record, but I've been getting calls from members who are asking questions." "What kind of questions?" "The kind that start with 'Is it possible?' and end with 'Because if so, we need to discuss how that reflects on the company.'" He looked at her steadily. "Someone is feeding these questions to people, and the questions are specific enough that whoever is feeding them has specific information." Victoria kept her expression entirely neutral. Years of practice. "Richard Hale's former business connections overlap with at least 3 board members," she said. "Not deeply, but enough." Lawrence nodded slowly. "That had occurred to me." "What do you need from me, Lawrence?" He looked at her for a long moment. He was 62 years old, and he had been in boardrooms with people who lied smoothly for 50 of those years. He was not a man who was easy to mislead. "I need to know," he said carefully, "whether what I'm about to go to the mat defending is worth defending." The room was quiet. Victoria said, "Adrian Brooks is in my home. He is part of my life, and what that means at its core is not something I'm going to let Richard Hale define." She held Lawrence's gaze. "That's what I'm asking you to defend." He studied her, took a breath. "All right," he said. "That's all. I've known you 11 years, Victoria. If you said it that way, it's true enough." He stood. "I'll manage the board. You manage Richard." He left. Victoria turned back to her window. She was still thinking about what she'd just said. Part of my life. She had said it to defend herself, and it had come out more honestly than she'd intended, and she could not decide. Sitting there at her desk on a Tuesday afternoon, whether that frightened her or whether something else was happening. She was still deciding when her phone buzzed. Adrian. A text message. Just a question. "Noah has a school thing Thursday evening. Presentation night. I know we have the Kellerman event. Do you want me to find alternate coverage, or are you handling it solo?" She read it twice. She typed back, "What kind of presentation?" A pause. Then, science fair. He did a project on bridge engineering. He's been working on it for 3 weeks. He thinks he's keeping it secret, but I've seen the index cards. She thought about that. About a 7-year-old quietly building a bridge project and keeping index cards and thinking he was being mysterious. She typed, "Skip the Kellerman event. It's not critical. We'll go to the presentation." A longer pause this time. Then, "You don't have to do that." She wrote back, "I know." She put the phone down, went back to her work. She didn't examine the decision. She'd made it, it was made, that was that. She absolutely examined the decision. For approximately 40 seconds. Then she made herself stop. The meeting with Richard happened 3 days later. She chose the restaurant. A quiet place, private booths with high backs, the kind of discretion that old money purchased. She arrived 8 minutes early, which meant she was already seated when he walked in, which meant she had the visual advantage. Richard Hale was 44, still handsome in the precise, maintained way of men who considered their appearance an asset and managed it accordingly. He walked toward her with the easy confidence of a man who believed he held more cards than he did. He sat across from her, smiled. "Victoria, you look—" "Don't," she said. He closed his mouth, adjusted. "All right." He picked up the water glass the server had already placed. "You asked for this meeting. I assume you have an agenda." "I do." She folded her hands on the table. "Stop." "Stop what?" "The campaign. The conversations. The brother-in-law of my driver." She watched something flicker across his face. At that she'd let him know she knew how he moved, and he'd registered it. Whatever you think you're building, Richard, stop building it. He leaned back, tilted his head slightly. I'm just talking to people. I haven't said anything that isn't true. You've implied things that aren't true, have I? He set the glass down. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you entered a financial arrangement with an employee and are now presenting that arrangement as a personal relationship to secure a $300 million deal. That's not implication, Victoria. That's description. You don't know what you're talking about. I know what I was told. By whom? He smiled again, the smile of a man who was not going to answer that. Victoria looked at him and felt the old anger, and underneath it, something new. Something that had not been there the last time she'd sat across from Richard Hale. A solidity. A certainty about what she was defending that was different from what she'd felt 3 years ago. 3 years ago, she'd been defending a wound, protecting damaged territory. This was different. Richard. She kept her voice very level. You came close to destroying me once. Not because you were clever, but because I was vulnerable, and I trusted you, and you knew exactly where to apply pressure. She held his eyes. I'm telling you now, so there is no ambiguity. I'm not that person anymore. Whatever pressure you're planning to apply, you are going to find that the foundation is different. He studied her. She watched him recalibrate. The foundation, he said slowly. Meaning him. She didn't answer. A maintenance worker, Victoria. His voice didn't quite lose its pleasantness. I'm not saying it to be cruel. I'm saying it because you are the CEO of a $4 billion company, and you have always operated in a world where what people think of you matters. And what people are going to think. I don't care, she said. The words surprised her. She'd said them before she finished deciding to say them, and then they were out, and she realized she meant them. And that was the thing she hadn't fully known until this moment. Richard stared at her. I don't care, she said again more quietly. What people think of who stands beside me. I built this company by understanding what mattered and what was noise. Richard is noise. She picked up her bag, stood. I'm asking you once clearly to stop. If you don't, I will spend every resource I have exposing exactly what you did 3 years ago and every move you've made since. I have been patient with you because I didn't want the ugliness. I am done being patient. She looked down at him. I hope this is the last time we're in the same room, she said. She walked out. Her hands were not shaking. She noticed that with some satisfaction. She sat in the car afterward, and Marcus was quiet in the front, the way he always was, and she looked out at the city and thought, I don't care. Held the words up and examined them, turned them over. She had spent 3 years caring. About perception. About narrative. About the story that people told about Victoria Sterling when she wasn't in the room. She'd built entire strategies around managing that story. And somewhere in the last 8 weeks living with a man who never once changed his behavior based on who was watching, something had shifted. She called Adrian. How'd it go? He said when he picked up. She thought about how to answer that. I said something I didn't plan to say, she said. And I think I meant it. A pause. Was it true? Yes. Then it's fine. A brief sound in the background. Noah, something about dinner. You okay? The question was simple and direct, and she had not been asked it sincerely in a long time. Yes, she said. I'll be home by 7. She hung up. Registered the word. Home. She'd said it without thinking. She said it most evenings now without thinking. The house had been an address for a very long time, and she had not noticed exactly when it became something else. Noah's science fair presentation was Thursday evening. They arrived together. Adrian in a jacket. Victoria, in something that was as close to casual as her wardrobe permitted Noah between them, with the stiff posture of a child performing very deliberate calm and mostly succeeding. I was carrying his bridge project in a box he'd insisted on carrying himself, and he held it with the careful intensity of someone transporting something breakable and irreplaceable. The school gymnasium had been transformed into the organized chaos of 30 elementary school science fair projects. Handmade posters, careful lettering, small proud scientists standing beside their work. the smell of glue and construction paper, and the particular excited anxiety of children who had worked hard on something. Noah set his project up at his assigned table, checked the bridge structure 3 times, straightened his display card, looked at his father. "Good," he asked. "Really good," Adrian said. "Miss Sterling." Noah turned to her with a seriousness that she had learned was his highest mode of sincerity. "What do you think?" Victoria looked at the bridge. It was built from popsicle sticks and strong glue strung with small paper weights to demonstrate load-bearing capacity. On the display card, in careful 7-year-old printing, was a title, "How Bridges Hold Up Weight and Design." And at the bottom, in slightly larger letters, what appeared to be a personal dedication for Dad, who fixes everything. She read that last line, and something tightened in her chest that she managed barely to keep off her face. "I think," she said, "that the load-bearing section is particularly impressive." Noah's face did something that was trying very hard not to be a huge smile and failing completely. "I tested it with actual weights," he said. "It held 42 grams before I stopped because I didn't want to break it." "Smart," she said. "Engineers know when to stop testing." He looked at her with the expression of someone who had just been told something that was going to stick with him. Other parents moved through the room. Teachers made their rounds. Several of Noah's classmates came by to assess his project with the ruthless competitive candor of 7-year-olds, and Noah held his ground with dignified confidence. A woman stopped at the table. She was the kind of woman who arrived at these events as social events first and school events second. Beautifully turned out comfortable in a room, the casual power of someone accustomed to running PTA committees. She looked at Noah's project, looked at Adrian, looked at Victoria. "Your son's project is wonderful," she said to them both, with the inclusive warmth of someone who was also taking careful stock. "Thank you," Adrian said. "First year at this school." "Yes, ma'am." "And you are?" Her eyes moved to Victoria, and there was recognition there. The slight recalibration that happened when people placed her face. "Victoria Sterling." "Yes," Victoria said simply. The woman blinked once. "I'm Renata Moss. My daughter Emma is the one over there with the solar system project." She extended her hand. "I didn't realize Noah's never mentioned." "He's private about some things," Adrian said with a straight face. Noah, who had absolutely told every person in his class that he lived in a big house, now looked at the ceiling with studied innocence. Renata Moss left eventually, and Adrian and Victoria exchanged a look across the table, and what passed between them, brief mutual. A shared recognition of exactly what had just happened felt more like a marriage than anything they'd done publicly in 8 weeks. Victoria noticed that. She filed it in the pile with everything else she was not examining. They drove home with Noah asleep in the back seat, the bridge project secured carefully beside him. Adrian reached back once to adjust the box so it wouldn't shift on a turn. Victoria watched him do it. "You do that automatically," she said quietly. "Do what?" "Account for him. Even when he's asleep. Even when you're not looking directly at him, some part of you is..." She paused. "Tracking." Adrian was quiet for a moment. "Yeah," he said. "I think that's just..." He considered it. "I think that's just what it is." She looked out the window. "I used to think," she said, and she wasn't sure why she was saying this, except that it was late, and Noah was asleep, and the car felt enclosed in a way that made honesty easier, that love was something you decided, a choice you made with full information, a thing you assessed and then committed to. She could feel him listening. He didn't interrupt. "I think I was wrong about that," she said. A long pause. The city moved past the windows. "What do you think it is now?" he said. She thought about it. "I think it might be more like something that happens while you're being practical. While you're getting the cereal out and fixing the faucet and tracking a sleeping child through the dark. I think it might not announce itself." He said nothing. She hadn't expected him to. It wasn't really a question. It was a woman thinking out loud about something she hadn't figured out yet. He reached over and turned the radio up slightly. Something quiet. Something that gave her the courtesy of not making that moment more than she was ready for it to be. She appreciated that more than she knew how to say. What happened next happened fast, and from a direction she hadn't been watching. It was not Richard in the end who created the crisis. It was someone much closer. His name was Derek Paulson. He was 38 years old, and he had been Victoria's head of corporate communications for 4 years. He was good at his job, excellent actually. He was also the person who had at some point in the previous month decided that his loyalty to Victoria Sterling had limits. Victoria found out on a Monday. She came in to find David Park already in her office, which never happened without warning, which meant it was bad. Derek spoke to a journalist, David said. He didn't sit. He stood with his hands in his pockets, and he looked like a man delivering news he'd been hoping he didn't have to deliver. Victoria set her bag down. Tell me. He gave an interview, not a published interview, a background conversation, but the journalist is planning to use it, confirming that your relationship with Adrian is contractual. He apparently has access to at least one document, possibly more. He gave details about the timeline, the financial structure, and... David paused. He specifically mentioned Noah, that the child was part of the arrangement as a deliberate image strategy. Victoria went very still. That part, she said. What exactly did he say about Noah? David met her eyes. That bringing the child was intentional, that it was calculated to present a domestic image to stop. Her voice was flat. Who is the journalist? David told her. When does the story run? 48 hours, maybe less. The journalist reached out to our PR team for comment this morning. That's how I found out. She stood at her desk and looked at nothing for a moment. Then she said, Fire Derek, today. Have security walk him out. Already done. He was escorted from the building at 7:30. She nodded. She was not thinking about Derek. She was thinking about Noah. About a 7-year-old boy who had been described in a journalist's notes as a deliberate image strategy. Who had carried his bridge project with such careful pride on Thursday night. Who left drawings on the refrigerator. Who had decided entirely on his own that Victoria Sterling needed someone to play cards with. She thought about how Adrian had said the very first day in this office before he'd signed anything, I need this to end clean. No loose ends that he has to carry. And she had given him her word. Her word was about to be tested by someone she had trusted with her company's reputation for 4 years. David, she said. Yes. I need to talk to Adrian before this breaks. He needs to hear it from me. The story. I know the timeline. I need to talk to Adrian first. She was already picking up her phone. Get me 2 hours. She called Adrian. He picked up on the second ring. She said, I need you to come to the office, now. And I need you to leave Noah at school until his normal pickup time. A brief silence. He read something in her voice. I'll be there in 20 minutes, he said. She thought about how to do this the entire time she waited. She had given difficult news to investors, to board members, to employees whose roles were being eliminated. She had delivered hard truths in rooms full of people who had every reason to react badly. She was good at it. Clinical and clear and compassionate in the exact measure that each situation required. She did not feel clinical now. Adrian arrived in 22 minutes. He came in the way he always came in, no performance, no visible anxiety, just presence. He looked at her face, and he knew something was wrong before she said a word. He sat down. She told him everything. Not a managed version. Not a version she'd edited for his comfort. She told him what Derek had done, what the journalist had when the story was expected to run, and exactly word for word, as David had reported it, what had been said about Noah. She watched his face as she said that last part. She had seen Adrian Brooks remain calm through a great many things. She had seen him absorb difficult information without flinching. She had seen him steady himself and others with the practiced ease of a man who had learned that emotion was not useful in emergencies. His jaw tightened. It was barely visible. The subtlest shift. But she had been watching his face for 8 weeks, and she saw it. How specific was it? He said. Very quiet. What was said about Noah? That he was brought in as part of a deliberate domestic image strategy. That his presence was... She stopped. Calculated. His hands flat on his knees pressed slightly. He's 7 years old, Adrian said. I know. He doesn't. Adrian stopped, looked away, looked back. He doesn't have a concept of strategy. He has a bridge project and a Spider-Man pillow, and he plays crazy eights because he decided you needed to learn how. His voice was controlled, but underneath it was something that was not controlled at all. He's not a prop. He never was a prop. I know that. Do you? He looked at her directly, and the directness was different now, sharper with something complicated underneath it. Because I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly. She said, all right. Did the fact that I had a son, did that factor into your decision to approach me specifically? Not as a good quality, not as a sign of character. Did you consider that a child would make the image more domestic, more convincing? The room was quiet. Victoria sat with this question. She owed him honesty. She had promised him honesty from the beginning. When I first looked at your file, she said carefully, I was looking for someone credible, someone who couldn't be easily bought. Your record and your character were the primary factors. She paused. I noted that you had a son, and I thought at the time that a family unit would strengthen the presentation. Yes. His jaw tightened again. But Adrian, she leaned forward slightly. In the first week he was here, that calculation stopped. Do you understand what I'm saying? By the time Noah asked me why I ate dinner alone, whatever I had originally calculated became... She stopped. He's not a strategy to me. He hasn't been since about Tuesday of the first week when he gave me Star cereal and looked at me like I was a person who needed feeding. Adrian looked at the window, looked back at her. I believe you, he said. I'm sorry, she said. For the Derek situation, for the breach. I gave you my word that this would end clean, and someone I trusted made that harder to keep. It's not your fault what Derek did. It happened on my watch with Derek had access to because he worked for me. That's mine. He was quiet for a moment. What happens now? He said. The story runs probably tomorrow. It will say what it says. Richard will use it. There will be board pressure. She looked at him steadily. And I am going to need you to decide before any of that happens what you want to do. He looked at her. The contract, she said. You signed it in good faith. What's happening now, the public exposure, the risk to your son's privacy, that is above and beyond what you agreed to. If you want to end the arrangement and take Noah out of the situation, I will honor the full payment regardless. No penalties, no conditions. She said it clearly. It cost her something. She said it anyway. Is that what you want? He said. She met his eyes. What I want is not the relevant variable right now. He studied her. A long moment passed. You know what Derek's account is missing, he said. She waited. What actually happened? His voice was steadier now. A reporter's got a leaked document and an embittered employee. They've got the structure of the arrangement. What they don't have is anything that happened inside it. What they don't have... He stopped, seemed to weigh something. What they don't have is the truth. The truth is complicated. Most truths are. He stood. I'm not running. I'm not pulling Noah out of his school 2 months after he finally settled into a routine because Richard Hale found a disloyal employee. He picked up his jacket from the chair back. But we need to figure out how to get ahead of this. She looked at him. This man who had been offered an exit and didn't take it. This man who, and she understood this now fully, was not staying because of the money. He had already earned more than enough to have walked away with dignity. He was staying because he was Adrian Brooks, and Adrian Brooks did not leave when things got difficult. I have an idea, she said. He waited. The board wants to see me tomorrow. Lawrence is managing it, but they're going to want answers. I could give them a managed presentation. Control the narrative limit, the information, present it professionally. She paused. Or I could bring you. He was quiet. Not as a prop, she said. Not as a performance. As the person who actually knows what's been happening in my house for 8 weeks. She looked at him. You said a reporter has the structure and not the truth. The board has the same problem. They're going to make decisions based on a document and a disloyal employee's account. You want me to go into a boardroom with your board of directors? Yes. I'm a maintenance technician. You're the person I trust most right now, she said. And I think they'll be able to tell the difference between performance and truth. He looked at her for a long time. What time? He said. The board meeting was at 11 the next morning. There were 9 board members, Lawrence Cho at the head of the table, and a particular atmosphere in the room that Victoria recognized the careful politeness of people who were preparing to make a difficult decision and were working out how long courtesy required them to wait before getting to it. She brought Adrian. She introduced him simply, by name, without title or context, just Adrian Brooks. He sat beside her. He was wearing the jacket he'd worn to Noah's science fair. He had not Victoria noticed changed into anything more boardroom appropriate, and she understood that was not oversight. Lawrence opened. He was careful and fair, as he always was. The board had questions. The story had run. It had broken online at 7 that morning, with the contract details and Derek Paulson's account prominent in the first 3 paragraphs. One of the board members, a woman named Cornelia Price, whose precision Victoria generally admired, looked at Adrian directly and said, "Mr. Brooks, I'll ask you plainly since you're here. Was this relationship from your perspective purely transactional?" The room waited. Adrian looked back at her with the same directness he gave everyone. When I signed the contract, he said, yes, it was a business arrangement. Clear terms, defined timeline. I understood what it was. He paused. What I didn't know is what 8 weeks in someone's house actually does. What it does to a kid who decides all on his own that the woman who owns the house needs someone to play cards with. What it does to... He stopped briefly. What it does to you when you find out what a person actually is. Not their reputation, not their title, the person. He looked around the table steadily. I'm not going to tell you that what started as a contract stayed a contract. I don't think that would be true. And I think you're people who've been around long enough to know the difference between something someone performs and something someone means. He looked at Victoria for a moment, just a moment, then back to the board. I can't tell you what to do with your company. That's yours to decide. But I can tell you that whatever is in that document, it's the smallest part of what's actually been happening. The room was very quiet. Cornelia Price looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Victoria. You didn't coach him, she said. No, Victoria said. I can tell. She turned her pen over once. All right. The meeting lasted another 40 minutes. There were harder questions. There were moments that required Victoria's most careful navigation. But Adrian stayed beside her, not performing, not strategizing, just there, and she felt it the way she'd felt it for 8 weeks without letting herself name it. When they walked out, Lawrence caught her in the corridor. That man, Lawrence said quietly, answered Cornelia's question in a way that no rehearsed answer ever would have. He looked at her for a moment. You should hold on to him. He walked away before she could respond. She stood in the corridor. Adrian was at the end of the hallway on his phone, and she could hear him from a distance. Something about a repair estimate for a client, efficient and businesslike. His other life running parallel to hers, as it always did. He hung up and turned and saw her looking at him. He walked back toward her. How'd we do? He said. I think we're all right, she said. He nodded. Then, I have to get Noah at 3. Of course. He started to move toward the elevator. Adrian? He turned. She wanted to say something. She had something to say that she had been accumulating for 8 weeks, small pieces of a larger thing that was becoming too heavy to keep carrying without setting some of it down. She said, thank you for staying when I gave you the option to go. He looked at her. I told you at the beginning, he said. I don't leave when things get hard. She looked at him, at this man who showed up and fixed things, and stayed and told the truth in boardrooms, and played cards with his son, and had never once in 8 weeks done anything for the optics of it. And she understood with a clarity that she had been circling for a long time exactly what she was feeling. She understood it, and it terrified her, because the last time she had felt anything like this, the man on the other end of it had taken everything she offered and handed it to lawyers. Adrian saw something move across her face. He watched her process it and pull back, and she saw him register the pullback and accept it without pushing. "I'll see you at home," he said. He pressed the elevator button. The doors opened. He stepped in, and Victoria Sterling stood in the hallway of her own company and watched the elevator doors close and understood for the first time in 3 years exactly how much she had to lose. The realization didn't come with fanfare. It came the way it always did, with Victoria, quietly through the numbers. She had spent 11 years knowing what things cost, knowing what the risk-reward calculus looked like on any given decision. She ran the calculus now. And what she got back, what she could not make work any other way, was that the cost of keeping the walls up was becoming higher than the cost of what she'd been protecting herself from. 3 years ago, Richard had taken her trust and weaponized it. She had rebuilt herself around the certainty that it would never happen again. She had made herself safe. She had also made herself alone, and she could not make that math work anymore. Not when she thought about a man who tightened faucets without being asked and stayed when he didn't have to, and told a room full of executives the truth because he didn't know how to do anything else. The walls had been the right choice after Richard. But they were built to keep out Richard. And Adrian Brooks was nothing like Richard Hale. She knew that. She had known it for weeks. She had just been applying the wrong data set to the decision. She walked back to her office, sat at her desk. The city spread out below her 42 floors of it, the same view she had used for years to remind herself of what she'd built and why it mattered. She looked at it. Then she picked up her phone. She typed a message to Adrian, stared at it, deleted it, started over, deleted it again. Then she set the phone down. Some things you didn't do over text. Some things you did in person in your own voice, without a strategy, without a plan, without knowing how the other person was going to respond. She had not done that in 3 years. She was going to have to do it now. She looked at the city. Somewhere on the other side of it, a 7-year-old was finishing a school day and waiting for his father to pick him up, probably with something important to report about the day. A discovery and injustice. A question that needed answering. And the man who would listen to all of it and take all of it seriously and carry all of it home was about to walk back into her house. She thought about what Lawrence had said in the corridor. "You should hold on to him." She thought about what she had said to Richard in the restaurant. "I don't care." She thought about a door that had opened and a woman who had spent years being certain of everything, suddenly certain of exactly one thing, which was that she could not let the contract end and not say what was true. She sat at her desk. She waited. She thought about how strange it was to be the most powerful woman in the room in every room she walked into, and to be sitting here now at the end of the longest day with nothing strategic left to reach for. Just a truth she needed to say out loud. And a man who she had learned always listened when you needed him to. He was in the kitchen when she got home. That was the first thing she noticed. Not the sound of the television, not Noah's voice, not any of the usual markers of the house being occupied. Just Adrian standing at the stove, a dish towel over his shoulder, doing something that involved a skillet, and whatever was in the refrigerator, with the unhurried competence of a man who cooked the way he did everything else, because it needed doing, and he was the one there to do it. Noah was at the kitchen table behind him, working through what appeared to be a math worksheet with the focused resentment of someone who found the material personally offensive. Victoria stood in the doorway for a moment before either of them saw her. She had driven home with a speech prepared. Not a long one, not strategic, just true. The thing she'd been carrying since the corridor outside the boardroom, since the restaurant with Richard, since 11:30 at night in the kitchen weeks ago when he'd made her tea without asking. She had organized it in the car. She knew what she wanted to say. Standing in the doorway watching him cook it all went somewhere. "Dad," Noah said without looking up from his worksheet. 4 times 8 is 32, right? Right. Then why does this problem? Noah stopped, looked up, saw Victoria. "You're home early." "Slightly," she said. Adrian turned from the stove. He looked at her the way he always looked at her, reading her before she spoke the way he'd been doing since the day she'd hired him, and she still hadn't fully adjusted to it. "There's enough for 3, he said. She set her bag on the counter. "Okay." She sat at the kitchen island. Not her office, Not the formal dining room, not anywhere deliberate. Just sat down in the room where the food was, and where the two of them were, and where the evening was happening, because it was where she wanted to be. Noah, satisfied with this development, went back to his math. Adrian went back to the stove, and Victoria sat in the kitchen of her own house and felt underneath the weight of the day, and the story, and the board meeting, and Richard, and all of it. Something that she recognized slowly as the specific relief of being somewhere you didn't have to perform. She had not felt that in a very long time. The story ran, she said, not to start a conversation, just stating it. I know, Adrian said. I saw it. And... He was quiet for a moment. A spoon turned in the skillet. And it said what it said. Most of it was accurate. He paused. The part about Noah wasn't. No, she said. It wasn't. Another pause. He doesn't know, Adrian said lower with a slight tilt of his head toward the table. I know. I'd like to keep it that way for now. Of course. Noah looked up. He had the hearing of a child who had learned early that important things sometimes happened in the pauses between adult sentences. Keep what way? Math, Adrian said. Noah looked at him with the expression of someone who knew he was being redirected and was choosing this time to accept it. He looked back at his worksheet. Victoria watched that small exchange, the look, the redirect, the acceptance, and thought about how much was communicated in those 3 seconds. How much history. How much trust. How a 7-year-old and his father had built an entire private language out of years of just the two of them navigating the world together. She ate dinner with them. Noah reported that his science fair project was being displayed in the school hallway for 2 more weeks, and that 3 different kids had asked him how he built it, and that he'd explained the load-bearing principles very clearly, and that Mrs. Patterson had said it was one of the best in his grade, and he delivered all of this with the careful modesty of someone who had practiced not bragging and was almost succeeding. Adrian listened to every word, asked follow-up questions, took it all seriously. And Victoria sat across the table and watched a father love his son with such complete and uncomplicated commitment that it made something ache in the center of her chest, dull and persistent and not unpleasant, the way certain true things ache. After Noah went to bed later than his official bedtime, because he'd negotiated an extension based on the claim that he had important things to think about, and Adrian had allowed it because Adrian understood that sometimes important thinking needed to happen, the kitchen went quiet. Adrian washed the pan. Victoria put the dishes in the dishwasher. They moved around each other in the kitchen with the casual navigational ease of people who had shared a space long enough to know each other's patterns, and neither of them pointed out that this domestic choreography had nothing to do with any contract. I need to tell you something, Victoria said. He turned off the tap, dried his hands, turned to face her. She had rehearsed this in the car. She had the words organized. She said, I found out last week that the Hargrove deal closed. He waited. Not last week in terms of the signing. Last week in terms of, I found out that it had been effectively closed for longer than that. She looked at him steadily. My legal team confirmed it on Friday. The deal was functionally complete 6 weeks ago. The remaining steps were administrative. Nothing that required your continued presence here. The kitchen was very quiet. She pushed through. Which means that the core business reason I gave you for the contract, the Hargrove negotiation, has not required this arrangement for 6 weeks, and I didn't tell you. Adrian looked at her. I didn't tell you, she said again, because she believed things needed to be said plainly, because I didn't want to, because I did not want you to leave. She paused. That was wrong. You signed an agreement based on certain terms. Withholding material information that would affect your decision to stay or go. That was a breach of the honesty I promised you in this office the day you signed. I was still looking at her. She could not fully read his expression, and that was unusual. She had learned his face over 8 weeks. I'm telling you now, she said, because I should have told you then, and because whatever you decide to do with that information, whether you want to end the arrangement immediately or adjust the terms or... She stopped. Reset. The decision is yours. It should have been yours 6 weeks ago. The silence stretched. Then Adrian said, when did you know exactly The day. She told him. He nodded slowly, looked at the counter, looked back at her. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Yes." "When you found out the deal was done, what did you feel?" She opened her mouth, closed it. She had an answer that was honest and an answer that was protected, and she had spent enough time in this kitchen being honest that she knew which one she owed him. "Relieved," she said. "That there was a reason to stay." She held his eyes. "And afraid underneath it. That it meant I had let something become real that I didn't know how to be responsible for." He didn't say anything immediately. I took that in the way he took most things without rushing toward it or away from it. "So you withheld it," he said. "Not to manipulate me, not like Richard." "No. Because you were scared." She said yes. Another quiet. Different from the ones before. "Victoria." He said her name the way he had that one other night without the title. Just the name. Just her. And it did the same thing it had done the first time. "I've been scared too." She looked at him. "I haven't." He stopped, pressed both hands on the counter behind him. "I haven't wanted anything for myself in 2.5 years. Since Diane. I focused on Noah because that was what was needed, and because honestly, it was easier than—" He paused. "It was easier than admitting that I was still a person who might want things." She waited. "I started wanting something again," he said. "About 5 weeks in. And I've been trying to figure out what to do with that, because the contract exists, and you built the walls, and I told you I wouldn't push against them unless you decided—" He looked at her. "You're telling me about the Hargrove deal?" "Yes." "That's you deciding." She said yes. He crossed the kitchen. He stood in front of her, close enough that she had to look up slightly. And he looked at her the way he'd been looking at her for 8 weeks, when he thought she wasn't watching, with the full, unguarded, completely uncalculated look of a man who had decided something and was done being careful about it. "I'm not angry about the 6 weeks," he said. "I want you to know that, because I understand why. Because you'd been burned, and trust doesn't come back in full the first time someone earns a piece of it. It comes back in installments." He reached up. His hand, careful, deliberate, came to the side of her face. "And I've been collecting installments." She didn't move away. She had spent weeks building the reflex to move away, and it didn't come. "You should know," she said, and her voice was steadier than she expected, "that I'm going to be difficult. I've been alone a long time, and I'm controlling, and I work too much, and I don't—" She stopped. "I'm not easy." "I fix things for a living," he said. "I'm not looking for easy." She looked at him. Then she did something she had not done in 3 years with genuine feeling. She let someone in. It was not a grand gesture. It was not cinematic. It was Victoria Sterling standing in her kitchen at 9:40 at night, leaning her head forward the few inches it took to rest her forehead against Adrian's shoulder, and just stopping. Just stopping the forward momentum for one moment, and letting herself be tired and scared and real and relieved. His hand moved to the back of her head, held her there. Neither of them said anything. Outside, the city kept going. 42 floors below her other life. Everything continued at the pace it had always run. Board pressures and journalist inquiries and Richard Hale's ongoing calculations and the Hargrove deal and the quarterly reports and the 1,000 moving pieces of a $4 billion company. Here in the kitchen, none of it. Just this. Just the truth of what had been building for 8 weeks, finally set down somewhere solid. She stepped back first. She wasn't ready for more than that, and he knew it. He let her step back. She looked at him, and he looked at her, and something had been renegotiated without a single legal document being involved. "The contract," she said. "What about it? It expires in 4 weeks." He said, "I know. I think we need to—" She paused. "I think some things need to be said clearly, without the contract as the framework. 4 weeks from now. When you're ready," she said. He looked at her for a moment, then quietly, "I've been ready." She believed him. That was the thing about Adrian. She had learned to believe what he said because he didn't say things he didn't mean. He was the most honest person she had ever let into her life, and she had let him in while pretending she hadn't, and now they were both just acknowledging what had been true for a while. She said goodnight. She went upstairs. She sat at her desk and did not open her laptop. She sat in the quiet of her office and let the evening settle around her, and she felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Not happy exactly. Not yet. Something earlier than happy. Something that came before happy, that was necessary for it. The particular feeling of having told the truth and still being in the room after. She had survived it. More than survived it. The board convened formally 2 days later to address the public situation. Victoria had prepared for it differently than she'd prepared for anything before. She did not bring a presentation. She did not bring projections or talking points or a media strategy. She sat at the head of the table, and she told them exactly what had happened from the beginning, and what it had become, and why she believed it was defensible on every level. Not because the beginning was clean, it wasn't, but because the truth of what the situation was now was something she was willing to stand in front of them and own. Lawrence Cho listened with his hands folded. Cornelia Price took notes she didn't look at. The other members sat with the careful attention of people deciding something significant. At the end, Lawrence said, "You're telling us that what began as a strategic arrangement became something genuine." "Yes." "And you're telling us that publicly, I'm telling you here honestly, what I say publicly will be managed appropriately." She paused. "But I'm done managing it in ways that require me to deny things that are true." Another silence. Cornelia looked up from her notes. "The journalist's story is already circulating. The damage, such as it is done. The question before the board is whether this constitutes a breach of the company's ethical standards regarding executive relationships with employees." "Adrian is no longer a Sterling Global employee," David Park said from his seat at the end of the table. "He resigned from the maintenance role at the start of the arrangement per the contract terms. There is no current employer-employee relationship." Cornelia nodded, wrote something. "And the Hargrove deal?" "Closed," David said. "Fully executed. Mr. Hargrove's team issued a statement this morning expressing full confidence in the partnership." Cornelia looked at Victoria. "Edmund Hargrove knows." "Edmund Hargrove," Victoria said, "is a 73-year-old man who built 3 companies from nothing and has been married to the same woman for 49 years. When David briefed his team on the full situation this morning, his response was..." She paused. "His exact words were, 'Tell her I've heard worse love stories and they all turned out fine.'" Something moved through the room. Not quite laughter. The closest a boardroom gets to warmth. Lawrence looked around the table. "Any objections to moving forward without further action?" Silence. "All right," Lawrence said. "Victoria, I trust you'll manage the public communications with your usual precision." "I will. And I trust," he added slightly drier, "that going forward all relevant personal developments will be disclosed in a timely fashion." "They will," he nodded. "Then we're done." He stood. The others followed, and as they filed out, Cornelia Price passed Victoria's chair and paused briefly. "For what it's worth," Cornelia said quietly enough that only Victoria heard, "when Mr. Brooks sat in this room and answered my question, I believed him before he finished his first sentence." She walked out. Victoria sat at the empty table for a moment. Then she picked up her phone and texted Adrian 2 words. "We're good." His response came back in under a minute. "Good. Noah wants to know if you're coming home for dinner or if he has to eat the pasta without you." She looked at that message for a moment. The specific domestic ordinariness of it. Noah wants to know. Home for dinner. The pasta. She wrote back, "Tell him I'll be home by 6:30. His response. "He says you better be because he helped make it, and he needs someone to tell him it's good besides me, because I always say it's good." She almost smiled. She didn't bother preventing it. She typed, "Tell him it's definitely going to be good." She put her phone in her bag, stood up, straightened her jacket, walked out of the boardroom. She got home at 6:27. The pasta was objectively good. Noah had made it with Adrian's guidance. The guidance had apparently been required at multiple stages, but the final product was genuinely solid, and Noah accepted her assessment of this with the satisfaction of an artist whose work had been properly received. They ate dinner. They talked about Noah's day and about a bird he'd seen outside his classroom window that he believed was a specific type of hawk but wasn't sure, and about whether or not hawks were the best birds, and about what the criteria for best bird would even be. And Adrian said, intelligence, and Noah said, no cool factor, and Victoria said, she thought the criteria should be usefulness, and Noah looked at her and said, hawks are useful and cool. Like this settled something, and she said, all right, hawks it is. It was the most absurd conversation she'd participated in years. She was fully engaged in it. After dinner, after Noah had gone through his bedtime routine and been tucked in and said his goodnights, Victoria and Adrian sat in the main room, not the formal sitting room, not the study. The room that had gradually become the room where evenings happened, and it was quiet and ordinary, and nothing like what Victoria Sterling's evenings had looked like 4 months ago. I need to tell you something else, she said. He waited. He had learned that she processed in layers, and he didn't rush her through them. The financial terms of the contract, she said. The payment schedule. I've been thinking about it. What about it? You've fulfilled everything you agreed to. More than everything. And there were aspects of this situation, the public exposure, the Derek situation, the board meeting, that were beyond what you signed up for. She looked at him. I'd like to restructure the compensation. Not as a negotiation. I want it to be right. He was quiet for a moment. Victoria, he said carefully. It's a practical matter. No, he said. Not unkind, firm. It's not. And you know it's not. He shifted to face her more directly. I hear what you're doing. You're trying to put a transaction in between us because that's the part you know how to do. That's the language you're comfortable in. She opened her mouth. I'm not taking additional money from you, he said. What we agreed to was fair. You honored it. The other things that happened, those happened to both of us. That's not something you compensate me for. He held her gaze. What's between us now is not a financial matter. And I think you know that. I think that's why you're trying to make it one. She looked at him. She said, you see through everything. Not everything, he said. But I've had 8 weeks to study. She looked down. Back up. I don't know how to do this, she said quietly. I want to be honest about that. I manage the business part because business is, I understand its grammar. This. She stopped. The last time I tried this, I lost everything I'd offered. And I rebuilt everything around not doing it again. Around being sufficient to myself. Around not needing. She stopped again. And now I'm sitting here needing. She said the word like it cost her something. Because it did. Adrian reached over. His hand covered hers on the cushion between them. Needing isn't the problem, he said. The problem was the last person you needed it from. She looked at their hands. I'm not Richard, he said. I need you to know that I know that's not enough just because I say it. I know you need time. I know trust doesn't work on a schedule. His hand was warm and steady. But I'm going to be here, same as I've been, and you can take as much time as you need. She turned her hand over, just that, just her hand turning under his. Noah is going to have opinions about this, she said. Noah, Adrian said, has had opinions about this since approximately the 3rd day. He told me at breakfast one morning, and I'm quoting directly, Miss Sterling is cool, but she's lonely. You should do something about that. Victoria stared at him. He said that. He's 7, he's direct. He's 7, and he diagnosed the situation in 3 days. He's also right, Adrian said. She looked at him. Yeah, he said simply. She took a slow breath. Let it out. Okay, she said. It was one word. It wasn't much. But it was Victoria Sterling saying okay with her hand turned over and her walls down and her voice steady, and Adrian Brooks heard everything in it. Outside, the city moved through its Monday night rhythms, traffic and lights, and the particular hum of several million people living their lives in close proximity. None of them aware that 42 floors up in a house that had been an address for a long time. A woman who had been alone for 3 years had said one word and meant everything by it. In Noah's room down the hall, the boy was probably still awake, probably thinking his important thoughts, his bridge project in his mind, his Spider-Man pillow in his arms, his photo of his mother on the nightstand. In the kitchen, the remains of the pasta he'd helped make. In this room, two people sitting with the specific stillness of something that had been in motion for a long time and had finally carefully found its place to land. Richard Hale made his last move the following week. Victoria almost expected it to be bigger than it was. She had spent so long preparing for Richard's worst that when it arrived it was almost a disappointment. He published a formal statement through his attorney outlining what he called serious ethical questions about Victoria Sterling's personal conduct and its implications for Sterling Global's leadership integrity. He included selective excerpts from the original contract stripped of context. He cited Derek Paulson's account. He implied with the careful implication of a man who had never once made a direct accusation he could be held to that the board should investigate. The board had already investigated, and they had already decided. Lawrence Cho's response was so measured and so complete and so devastatingly on point that Victoria read it twice and felt genuine admiration. He did not attack Richard. He did not play in the mud. He simply stated what the board had found, what they had determined, and expressed their full and continued confidence in Victoria Sterling's leadership, personal life, and all. The financial press picked it up. The business press moved on quickly because there was no story where the expected story should have been. Victoria Sterling had not been brought down. The Hargrove deal was solid. The board was unified. The company's quarterly numbers released that week were the best in 3 years. The only person who seemed genuinely interested in continuing the narrative was Richard, and after 2 days of trying to keep it alive with no help from anyone, he went quiet. Victoria watched his name disappear from her alerts feed and felt not triumph, but something quieter. The satisfaction of having survived specifically the thing you'd been afraid of surviving. She called David that evening to close the loop. "It's done," David said. "He'll make noise somewhere else eventually, but this particular campaign is over." "Good." Victoria. A pause. "For what it's worth, and I've known you 11 years, so I think I'm permitted you handled this better than I expected. The board meeting with Adrian. The honesty." He paused again. "Richard expected you to be defensive. You weren't." "I didn't have anything to be defensive about," she said. "Not about the part that mattered." "No," David said. "I suppose you didn't." She put the phone down. Adrian was in the study, working on something on his laptop. He'd picked up a small consulting contract from a building management firm, using his maintenance expertise in an advisory capacity, and he worked on it some evenings with the focused quiet of a man who had always known the value of his own skills, even when others hadn't seen it. He looked up when she came in. "Richard," he said. "Done," she said. He nodded. She sat on the couch across from him. He went back to his laptop. She picked up the book she'd been meaning to finish for 3 weeks. She opened it. They sat in the study together, in the specific comfortable silence of two people who had nothing to prove to each other and nowhere else they needed to be, and the evening moved around them and down the hall. Noah slept with his important thoughts, and outside the city ran its course. Victoria read 3 pages before she realized she was not thinking about Richard or the board or the contract or any of the structures she had spent 8 months building and defending. She was thinking about the 4 weeks left on a contract that no longer meant what it had meant when they'd signed it. She was thinking about what came after. She looked up from her book. Adrian was looking at her. "I can hear you thinking from over here," he said. She almost smiled. "Sorry. Don't be." He closed his laptop. "What is it?" She looked at him. At this man who had come into her house with a Spider-Man pillow-carrying child, and a crescent wrench, and the quiet, unshakable integrity of someone who had decided a long time ago what kind of person he was going to be, and had simply been that person every single day, without needing anyone to applaud it. She said, "I'm thinking that I'm glad I called you into my office that day." He looked at her steadily. "Even though I did it wrong the first time," she said. "You did it wrong the first time," he agreed. "And you walked out." "I walked out. And I called you back." "You did." She held his gaze. "I'm glad I called you back." He looked at her for a long, unhurried moment. And then he said in the quiet voice that she had come to understand meant he was being most completely himself. So am I. The contract had 4 weeks left. Neither of them were thinking about the contract. The last 4 weeks of the contract passed the way. Good things pass faster than you want them to, and fuller than you expected. There was no dramatic countdown. No calendar on the wall. Just the ordinary accumulation of mornings and dinners and evenings in the study, and Noah's running commentary on everything from Hawk taxonomy to the injustice of long division, and underneath all of it, a quiet awareness that a date was approaching, and neither of them had decided what to do about it out loud. They had decided in every other way. In the turned hand on the cushion. In the way Adrian started leaving his coffee cup on her side of the kitchen island, because that was where she sat in the mornings. In the way Victoria began checking his consulting schedule before she booked events. Not because the contract required it, but because she had started thinking in terms of his time as connected to hers. In 100 small adjustments that neither of them named, because naming them would have made them something to manage, and they were both done managing this. Noah, characteristically, was less subtle. 3 weeks before the contract's end date, he came to breakfast with the air of someone who had been thinking overnight and arrived at a conclusion. He sat down, poured his cereal, looked at Victoria. "Are you going to make us leave?" he said. Victoria set down her coffee. "What? Dad said the agreement ends soon." Noah's voice was careful in the way that children's voices go careful when they're asking something they actually need the answer to. "I just want to know if we're going to have to leave." Victoria looked at Adrian, who was standing at the counter with the expression of a man who had been hoping this particular conversation would happen differently. "Noah," Adrian said. "I'm just asking," Noah said, "because I like my room, and I like Mrs. Patterson's class, and—" He paused. He stirred his cereal. "I like it here." The kitchen was quiet. Victoria said, "You're not going to have to leave." Noah looked at her, reading her the way he always did, directly, without the social filters adults layered over everything. "You sure yes," she said. "Yes." He nodded once, returned to his cereal. "Okay," he said, as though the matter was settled, and in his mind it apparently was, and he moved on to telling Adrian about a disagreement he'd had with a classmate about whether or not sharks could technically be considered fish, and the morning continued. Adrian caught Victoria's eye across the kitchen. She held his gaze. He said nothing. But what passed between them in that moment was an acknowledgement, clear, mutual, unhurried, that the question Noah had asked and the answer Victoria had given were both true in ways that extended well beyond the next few weeks. She was sure. The contract's end date landed on a Thursday. Victoria had the original document pulled from David's files that morning. 37 pages. The same document that had started all of it. The financial terms, the behavioral guidelines, the termination clause, the confidentiality provisions that specifically covered Noah. She had signed it in this office 12 months ago, across from a man who had told her he wasn't something she could rent, and then reconsidered because he had a son, and a broken radiator, and a set of values that included taking care of the people who depended on him even when it cost him something. She read it once, not for legal purposes. She already knew what it said. She read it because she wanted to remember exactly what this had looked like at the beginning, before anything had become what it became. Then she picked up the phone. "Adrian," she said when he answered. "Can you come to my office?" A brief pause. He knew the date. "Now. When you have a moment. Give me 20 minutes. He arrived in 23. He came in the way he'd come in 12 months ago. No performance, no visible anxiety, just presence. He was not in his maintenance uniform this time. He hadn't worn that in months. He was in the clothes of a man who had his own life, his own work, his own shape in the world, and he wore them without apology, which was one of the things Victoria had come to understand she most deeply respected about him. He sat in the chair across from her desk. She slid the contract across. He looked at it. She picked up the copy she'd been holding. She looked at him once, holding his eyes long enough to make sure he understood that this was not a gesture, not a performance, not something designed to communicate a particular message. It was just true. Then she tore it in half. The sound it made was smaller than she expected. Just paper, just the clean rip of something that had served its purpose and was finished now. She set the two halves on the desk. "I hired you to stand beside me," she said. 12 months ago in this office I put a folder in front of you and told you I needed a husband, and I told you I would pay you, and I told you it would end cleanly." She looked at the torn pages. "None of that is what this is anymore." She looked at him. "So I'm going to say something to you without a contract, without a payment structure, without a termination clause." She paused. "And I'm going to need you to just hear it, without looking for the strategy in it, because there isn't one." "I'm listening," he said. "You walked into my house 12 months ago, and you fixed a faucet, and you played cards with your son, and you made tea at 11:30 at night, and you sat in a boardroom and told the truth when you didn't have to." She kept her voice steady. "You treated my home like it was worth being in. You treated me like I was worth knowing. Not Victoria Sterling, the CEO. Not the woman on the magazine covers. Me." She pressed on. "I didn't know what to do with that. I hadn't let anyone see that version of me in a long time. I'd gotten so used to being adequate to myself that I'd stopped noticing the cost of it." Adrian was very still. He was watching her with the complete unguarded attention that was one of his most disarming qualities, not waiting for a pause to speak, not formulating his response. Just listening. "I'm in love with you," she said. The office was quiet. "I know that might be complicated given how this started. I know that the origin of this is it's not a clean love story. It started as a transaction, and I withheld information from you, and I kept the walls up longer than I should have, and I don't come without—" She stopped. "I don't come easy." "You told me that," he said quietly, "on the first night. I remember. And I told you I wasn't looking for easy." She looked at him. "I know you did." He leaned forward, rested his forearms on his knees. "Victoria," he said. And the way he said it, the same way he'd said it that night in the kitchen, the same way he'd said it the night she'd told him about the Hargrove deal, the same weight he always gave it, landed exactly the way it always landed. "I've been in love with you since about the night you sat across from my son and lost to him at Crazy Eights on purpose and pretended you didn't." She opened her mouth. "You let him win the second game," Adrian said. "You had a 4 and a 2 and you played the 2. He had the 4 he needed on the next draw. You saw it and you let him take it." She stared at him. "I was 7 years old and he needed to win something that week," Adrian said. "His school project had just been criticized by a kid in his class, and he'd been quiet for 2 days, and you saw it, and you played the 2. He held her eyes. "That's when I stopped pretending I wasn't feeling what I was feeling." Victoria did not know what to do with being seen that completely. She sat with it. She made herself sit with it instead of deflecting. Because she was done deflecting, she had decided that, and she was going to hold to the decision. "I have some things to say to you too," Adrian said. He stood. He came around the desk, and she turned in her chair, and he crouched down so that he was at her level, not looming over her, not below her, just face to face the way he'd come down to the level of Marcus, the frightened kid in the lobby a year ago, because that was simply how Adrian Brooks approached people when something mattered. "I came into this house with a contract and my son, and the understanding that I was doing something practical for practical reasons," he said. "What I didn't account for is what it would feel like to stop surviving and start living again." His voice was level. It had the careful quality of a man saying something he'd held for a long time. "I had gotten so good at just getting through each day, Noah's lunches, and the rent and the repair jobs, and keeping everything functional, that I'd stopped asking myself what I actually wanted, not what I needed, what I wanted." He looked at her. "I want this," he said. "Not the house, not what you have. I want you. The woman who ate the cereal and tore the contract and sat in the kitchen at 11:30 and never once asked me to be something different from what I am." He paused. "I want to be in the same house as you. I want to watch you run things, and I want to tell you when I think you're wrong, and I want to sit across from you at dinner while our son tells us about hawks." He stopped. "Our son, I said that." "You did," she said. "It felt right," he said. "It did," she said. He reached up and took her hand from the armrest of the chair. held it the way he'd held it that night on the couch, steady, unhurried, with the particular warmth of a man who meant what he was doing. "So here's what I'm asking," he said. "Not because the contract's over. Not because we need a new arrangement or a new structure. I'm asking because I want to, and because I think you want to, and because that's enough." He looked at her directly. "Can we just be this whatever this actually is, without a document telling us what the rules are?" Victoria looked at him. She had run her company for 11 years on the principle that every important commitment needed clear terms, defined outcomes, measurable benchmarks. She had built one of the most successful technology companies in America on the foundation of knowing exactly what every agreement meant. She looked at Adrian Brooks crouched in front of her chair with her hand in his, asking her to commit to something that had no terms, no timeline, no exit clause, no protection. She said, "Yes." Just that. He looked at her for a moment. Something in his face settled the particular settling of someone who has been carrying a weight at a careful angle for a long time, and has finally been told they can put it down. He stood. She stood. And Victoria Sterling, who had not been held by anyone in 3 years, who had built the walls, specifically, so that she would not need to be stepped forward the small distance it took to close the gap between them, and let herself be held. His arms came around her without ceremony. He didn't make a production of it. He just held her the way he did everything, solidly, without performance, with the complete attention of someone who understood that this was the thing that mattered right now and gave it everything it deserved. She stood there in her office in the building she had built and let 37 pages of contract and 3 years of walls and one very bad decision she'd made about trust mean less than they had meant 20 minutes ago. It took longer than she expected. That was fine. She didn't rush it. When she stepped back, he let her step back. She looked at him. "I have a 10:30, she said. He almost laughed. "Of course you do. And you have the Weston building estimate at noon." "I do. Tonight," she said. "Tonight," he agreed. He picked up the 2 halves of the contract from the desk. He looked at them for a moment. Then he set them back down. "Should we?" he started. "David will handle it," she said. "The legal closeout. He's efficient." "Okay." He moved toward the door. Paused. "Victoria." She looked at him. "Thank you," he said, "for calling me back that second time, when I walked out." She held his gaze. "Thank you for walking back in." He left. She turned to her window. The city below her, same as always, 42 floors of it. The same view she had looked at for 11 years when she needed to remember what she'd built. She looked at it now and thought about something different. About what got built when you weren't tracking it. What assembled itself in the kitchens and the card games and the late evenings and the honest conversations without a plan, without a strategy. Because 2 people had ended up in the same space and had, despite every reasonable defense, let each other be real. She had built a company by knowing exactly what she was building. She had built this by accident. She thought privately that this one might be the better work. Her 10:30 was on the calendar. She had calls, reports, decisions, the unending motion of a $4 billion company that required her to show up fully every day. She showed up fully. She always did. But today she did it with something different underneath everything. A warmth low and steady. The kind that doesn't demand attention, but changes everything it touches. That evening she came home at 6:15. Noah was in the kitchen at his usual spot at the island, apparently in the middle of explaining something to Adrian with considerable urgency. "Because the wingspan matters," Noah was saying. "You can't just say it's a big bird. You have to say what kind of big and why." "All right," Adrian said. "What kind of big? Red-tailed hawk big. Which is different from bald eagle big, which is different from—" Noah stopped when he saw Victoria. "You're early." "I am," she said. "Dad made the chicken thing." "The chicken thing," Adrian said from the stove, "has a name." "It has a long name," Noah said. "I call it the chicken thing. Miss Sterling, do you know how much a red-tailed hawk weighs?" "I don't," she said. "About 2 to 4 pounds. But the wingspan is like 4 feet, so it's not very heavy, but it's very wide." He nodded significantly. "That's good design." "It is," she said. She sat at the island. Good design is about the relationship between elements, not just any one thing. Noah considered this. Like a bridge. Like a bridge, she agreed. He looked satisfied. He went back to what appeared to be a drawing of a hawk with measurement annotations. Victoria looked at Adrian. He was looking at her over Noah's head, and the look had the particular quality of a man who saw exactly what was happening and found it quietly wonderful. She looked back at her son, and that word which she had not let herself use even in the privacy of her own thoughts until this moment landed without complication. Her son. The boy who had eaten cold toast on school mornings and carried a Spider-Man pillow across the city and decided on his own authority that a lonely woman in a big house needed someone to play cards with. She looked at the drawing he was making. "Noah," she said. He looked up. "The Hawk Project, is that for school or for you?" He thought about it. "Both," he said. "But mostly me. I want to understand it." "Then take your time with it," she said. "The things you learn because you want to understand them, those are the ones that stay." He looked at her with the expression of someone storing information. "Okay," he said. He went back to his drawing. Adrian put dinner on the table. They ate the chicken thing, which was very good, and Noah talked about hawks and wingspan to weight ratios and bridge engineering, and a boy in his class named Theo, who had bet him that a bald eagle could beat a red-tailed hawk in a direct confrontation, and Adrian said that depended on context, and Noah said context was just a fancy word for excuses, and Victoria said that was an interesting philosophical position, and Noah said he didn't know what philosophical meant, but that Theo was still wrong. It was a completely ordinary dinner. It was the best dinner Victoria Sterling could remember having in years. After Noah went to bed, after the negotiation about reading time and the good night to his mother's photograph that he did quietly every night without ceremony, the small ritual that Adrian had told her about once and that she had never acknowledged out loud because it felt like something that deserved its privacy. Victoria and Adrian sat in the room that had become the room where evenings happened. The city was quiet in the way cities go quiet after 10. A different frequency. Fewer sirens. The low, settled hum of millions of people doing what people do at the end of a day. "He said philosophical," Victoria said. "He picks things up fast," Adrian said. "He gets that from you." Adrian looked at her. "He gets a lot of things from people around him. That's a kid thing. He paused. They're still forming, still taking on the shapes of the people they're with." He was quiet for a moment. "He's been talking about load-bearing design in more situations since the science fair. Buildings Hawks arguments. He's applying the concept." "Because someone told him engineers know when to stop testing," she said. "Because someone took his work seriously," Adrian said. "There's a difference." She looked at him. "He needed that," Adrian said. "Not accusatory, just true. He needed an adult who wasn't me to take what he cares about seriously. I take it seriously, but I'm his dad. That's different. That's expected." He looked at her directly. "You being there, you listening to him, that meant something specific to him that I couldn't give him." Victoria sat with that. She had thought for so long that she was not built for this. Not built for children, not built for domesticity. Not built for the unguarded, unmeasurable, non-strategic work of being in a family. She had believed it so completely that she hadn't examined whether it was actually true, or whether it was just another wall she'd built after Richard, another protection dressed up as self-knowledge. "I was wrong," she said. Adrian tilted his head slightly. "About not being built for this," she said. "I told you that in the kitchen early on, that I wasn't built for it." She looked at her hands. "I think I was wrong. I think I was describing the wall, not the person behind it." He was quiet for a moment. "Yeah," he said. "I think so too." She looked at him. "You know what I noticed," he said. "In the beginning, the very first week." He leaned forward slightly. "You have a system for everything in this house. The kitchen runs on a schedule. The staff know their roles. The calendar is managed to the hour." He paused. "The first time Noah left a drawing on the refrigerator, you didn't take it down." She looked at him. "It was still there 3 days later," he said. And I saw you look at it every morning when you got your coffee. You didn't think I noticed, but I did. She thought about those drawings. There were 4 of them on the refrigerator now. A dog. A cloud that looked like a dinosaur. A hawk, obviously. And one she hadn't asked about, a drawing of 3 people rough in the way 7-year-old drawings were rough, standing in front of what appeared to be a house. She had not taken any of them down. I think the person who can't be built for this, Adrian said, is the person who takes the drawings down. She looked at him for a long time. Then she said very quietly, I don't take them down. No, he said. You don't. Later, when it was later, and the city had moved into its deepest frequency, and the house had settled into the particular quiet of a house where people were finally sleeping. Who needed to sleep? Victoria sat on the edge of her bed and thought about 12 months. She thought about the lobby. The lobby where she'd first seen him on his knees on the marble floor, tightening a vent. Taking the call from Noah about the blue folder, doing 17 things at once, with the unhurried precision of someone who had learned to be enough for everything, because everything needed him to be. She thought about the folder she'd put on the desk. 37 pages. The certainty she'd had sitting across from him that this was a manageable situation, with defined parameters and a clean exit. She thought about every moment since. The cereal. The tea. The boardroom. The kitchen at 11:30. And the card games and the science fair and the torn contract on her desk this morning. She thought about a little boy who carried his mother's photograph across the city and drew hawks on graph paper and asked the important questions directly and without apology. She thought about a man who fixed things, not just faucets, not just filtration units and sticky drawers and rattling vents. The other things, the quieter things, the things that were broken in a house that had too much money and not enough warmth, and in a woman who had too much control and not enough courage. He hadn't set out to fix those things. He'd just been himself consistently without performance every single day. And that she understood now was the thing that had done it. Not a gesture, not a speech, not a grand moment. Just a man being completely and without apology exactly who he was. She had spent 3 years building herself into something sufficient, something self-contained, something that didn't need. And he had spent 3 months being real in her vicinity, and that had been enough. She thought about what she'd said in the office. I'm in love with you. The words that had come out before she finished deciding to say them, and that had been, she now understood, the most honest thing she'd said in this building in 11 years. She thought about Noah's drawing on the refrigerator. 3 people in front of a house. She thought about the word she'd used this evening without deciding to use it, her son. She lay back, looked at the ceiling. Outside the window, the city was dark except for its own light. The particular restless glow of a city that never went completely dark, that kept some version of itself awake at all hours, pressing against the night. She had been part of that restlessness for 11 years, moving at that pace, driving herself at that frequency. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel restless. She felt like she had arrived somewhere. She closed her eyes. Down the hall, Noah was asleep with his Spider-Man pillow and his photograph and his hawk drawing waiting on the desk for tomorrow. And in the room at the end of the same hall, Adrian was reading his paperback the way he read it every night, a few pages unhurried before he set it on the nightstand and turned out the light and slept the straightforward sleep of a man whose conscience was clear. 3 people in a house. 3 people who had found each other through the most unlikely, impractical contractual route imaginable, and had made something real out of it anyway. In the morning, there would be cereal and coffee, and Noah's important overnight thoughts delivered at breakfast speed, and Adrian's quiet competence moving through the kitchen, and her calendar full of decisions that needed making, and all of it would be woven together the way it had been woven together for months. Not because a contract required it, not because an arrangement had been maintained, but because 3 people had chosen each other and kept choosing and would keep choosing tomorrow. That was it. That was the whole of it. A single father who showed up every day with everything he had. A little boy who saw lonely people clearly and decided to do something about it. And a woman who had been sufficient to herself for so long that she'd forgotten what it felt like to let sufficiency be the floor instead of the ceiling. The contract had lasted 12 months. What replaced it had no expiration date, no termination clause, no defined terms. What replaced it was a choice made freely, clearly made by two people who no longer had any reason they had to stay, except the only reason that had ever mattered. They wanted to. And that more than any document she had ever signed in that office was the truest thing Victoria Sterling had